Hey Refill fam, Wesley from Bayside Davis, and I hope you are having a great morning or day or whatever time you're listening to this. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul writes this, verse 9, "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Paul writes that after telling a story of how 14 years previous, he had seen a vision of heaven. Heaven where God is. He saw the place that God dwelled. He saw the glory of God. He saw the presence of God in heaven in a vision given to him by God. And as he narrates this story of what he saw, he then talks about seeing this vision of God, then having a thorn in the flesh. Many people wonder what Paul's thorn in the flesh is. Well, it was some form of suffering. Some people think that it was physical suffering, an eye ailment that he talks about in Colossians. Other people think that it's a psychological form of suffering. Paul talks about in 2 Corinthians, different forms of psychological suffering that he had experienced. And then others think it was oppositional suffering. In other words, he had enemies in every city. People that were opposed to the message of Jesus, people that were opposed to him teaching the scriptures. And those enemies were like a deep, painful thorn in his flesh. Whatever it is, it was some form of suffering. And he wrestled with this. He said in verse 8, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But here was God's response. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Maybe the question that I'd pose to you today is, how do we find strength in weakness? I think in verse 9, there's 3 things. When we're going through a thorn in the flesh experience, when we have some sort of suffering in our life, opposition in our life, persecution in our life, there's 3 things in verse 9 that are so valuable, not only to know, but to remind ourselves of. Number 1, God's presence is with me. My. The reason that God is saying my is because he's like, Paul, I am present in the midst of everything that you're going through. Remind yourself of that when you are facing a thorn in the flesh moment, that God's presence is with me. Second, God's grace is sustaining me. He says, my grace is sufficient for you. Now, there is saving grace. That's what we usually think about when we think about grace. Jesus died on the cross. God's given me what I don't deserve. He forgives all my wrongdoing, past, present, and future. Well, there's another form of grace in the New Testament. It is sustaining grace. This is the type of grace that we need in the hard seasons of life, where God shows up in such special and unique and redemptive ways in our life and gives us resources, freely gives us the resources we need in the midst of thorn in the flesh type of seasons. And then third, notice what he says last. He says, for my power is made perfect in weakness. God's grace is sustaining me, and God's power is helping me. And this is interesting because Paul, in the midst of his suffering, his thorn in the flesh, didn't stop serving Jesus. There were unique challenges, obviously, whether it was physical or psychological or oppositional. There were unique challenges, but he kept serving the Lord even in his weakness. There's something powerful about us sharing our weakness. There's something that God does in a powerful way through us and within the context of influencing people when we realize that God's power is enabling us still to affect people in a redemptive and positive way, even in the midst of our own weakness. Suffering's been such a huge part of the storyline of my life. And, there's been times and seasons that I thought, I might as well just throw in the towel, stop doing what I do. Suffering's too painful and hard. I'm weary. But I have found that when I share my weakness, that God's power is at work in the midst of my weakness. May that be an encouragement to you today. I hope you have an amazing day, and remind yourself that there is strength in the midst of weakness. In Jesus' name.
Hey, thanks for watching that refuel. We would love you to subscribe below. Hit the subscribe button for this YouTube channel, because this Bayside YouTube channel is where we send out all of our video content so you can get all of it. Make sure you subscribe. Thanks for watching.